Hi everyone, it's Mike J again, Self-Knowledge Video. We're going to take a look at the IWAM, the Institute for Work, Attitude, and Motivation, has created this real opportunity for us to examine things in a different way. I want to show you what that way looks like as we move forward. Just to give them credit, mapping the new landscape of human performance, and then decoding behavior to improve performance. We'll tag on a little bit of productivity and innovation with that, called the Inventory for Work, Attitude, and Motivation, or short IWAM. It's made up of motivational and attitudinal patterns. These patterns are called maps. They're, in a more complex way of saying it, they're meta-programs. When you start talking about the realm of cognitive psychology, you start talking about a different language. And meta-programs fits very well in terms of understanding how motivational and attitudinal patterns actually emerge as a result of who we are. So they're very important. They are also unconscious filter or translators. You might even say transcribers and translators that are part of how we construct and confirm our models of the world, our mental models, our models of reality. They work like the breath and the heartbeat. Can you think right now? Can you feel your heart beating? Why is it beating? You're not telling it to beat. You're breathing. I know you're breathing. And at the same time, the completely unconscious, amazing system that we have going, the same thing can be applied to these meta-programs. We don't think about them. They're mostly unconscious. Now, part of what we're doing in self-knowledge is to bring some of the unconscious things that we don't really think about into that area of thought, so we can begin to look at them objectively and be less subject to them. So that's part of the process. Since these patterns are a major determinant of what we perceive at any given time, they impact us directly in terms of how we interact with ourselves, the others around us, and the world around us. Although motivational and attitudinal patterns or maps are universally shared, in other words, everybody has something, the way we apply them varies from person to person, and the big thing I need to tell you here is context to context. I really need to explain that to you just a bit. In every context, there's a set of assumptions and beliefs, or a set of rules or guiding principles, and those function to keep the context organizationally closed. In most contexts, they're organizationally closed and energetically open. That's how we get back to our energy and information. That was actually a Nobel Prize won in the 70s by Prigogine. And he talked about these things as dissipative structures. So dissipative structures are what keep us organizationally closed but energetically open, so that those particular organizational sets can become open. How does the IWAM work? The roots of the Inventory for Work, Attitude, and Motivation are in the field of cognitive psychology, as we mentioned, in the study of relationship between language and behavior. That's just a little footnote I need to make sure that you understand, because we're going to rely on that principle a little bit later to explain something else. Individuals store in memory and retrieve experience on the basis of language. Our stored experiences, including both facts, information, emotions, feelings, and all the other senses that we were feeling. It's an idea like you'll be walking along and you'll smell something, or you'll see something, or someone will do something that will cause you to feel a certain way, and a memory will pop up. And that memory is a full memory. In other words, it's got all the senses that were there. The reason it's hooked together is because you smelled it or felt it, those kinds of things. So the sensory input is actually laid down with the experience, which make them so powerful, especially for those of us that spend more time, let's just say, getting closer to our experience rather than thinking about our experience. We'll note that when we talk about learning style. Early research in the field revealed that people who use certain kinds of language patterns tend to exhibit certain kinds of behavioral patterns. That is, similar language manifests in similar behavior. This is really exciting. It came out of the field of neurolinguistic programming, and there is an amazing amount of work that's been done, especially early 70s, around this whole particular idea of how language connects us to behavior. There's a direct link between language and behavior in a context. Remember, in a context. In a context, similar language manifests in similar behavior. Remember that. It's important to contextualize this, and let me explain to you why. You will act different at church than you do in school, than you do at work, than you do in your house, than you do with your buddies, doing whatever it is you're doing, going shopping on Black Friday, watching the football games. In other words, there's a set of assumptions and beliefs that create the context. And the context itself has those assumptions, beliefs, those mental models, and within that, there's a link between the language and behavior. It's like inviting someone to your house who's never seen what it is you're watching before, and they won't understand all of the context that's going on, so they won't relate to it in terms of language and behavior, and you'll hear them say crazy things sometimes because they really don't understand that in the context it means something else. That's important, because what we asked you to do, or those of you who haven't taken this yet, what we're asking you to do is to remember your context of work. Okay. Now remember, if you take this 1 year and then 6 years later you're in a different role, the context will change. So some of these things will modify, but they'll tend to thread together like beads on a string. You'll see the relationships to them. So the patterns, the meta programs actually shine through all of this when you get to that level of voltage and you begin to say, oh, this is a meta program of, let's say, goal setting, or this is a meta program of whether I look outward or whether I tend to kind of keep my stuff close. So these are important that we understand. Context dictates a lot of what the language and behavior does in that context. But when you change the context, we then see a shift in language and behavior. You don't talk the same way you talk to, let's just say, respected elders that you talk to your kids or somebody that you're trying to sell something to. The context, and inside that context, the language and behavior is consistent. And inside that context, we can begin to understand the language and behavior and their links. And that's what we're talking about, that IWAM doing when it looks at these meta programs that are in all contexts. Okay? So language and motivation. Words themselves can incite physical and emotional reactions. That's because of our experience and all those memories and all of the things that we've been told and the powerful who-says in our life and all those kinds of things. We actually can use those words to connect things. And that's a very important part of why language is so important and sets us apart from the other primates. Words and phrases may serve as verbal triggers or hot buttons. I know this is so important for me. I'm a former Marine, and the context in Marine Corps boot camp is very much different than the context that I shared in my life outside of that boot camp. And even now, today, when I run across different things that trigger that, I think back to those times because I have serious and severe memories from that experience. So definitely words and phrases can trigger this, and those hot buttons are really important for us to be able to, let's just say, recognize. The more we can recognize and regulate our own self-knowledge, and that self-knowledge that we understand about others gives us the opportunity for really beginning to understand how to behave differently in these different contexts in a way that increases all kinds of things that are good for us. If a hot button is activated by language or situation, this is just an example, it's oversimplified, but it can motivate us to action. In other words, get us going in the vernacular, in the desired direction, but it also can demotivate us. It can keep us from being motivated. And that's one of the things that the IWAM is unique about, because it shows us what will move us and what will block us and motivate us in the opposite direction of the desired action. That's very important, because a lot of time management and leadership are doing things that actually motivate us, but in the opposite direction. And it's really important to understand that about the people that you work with. If you're trying to motivate them, you need to understand what demotivates them too, so you understand the whole picture, and it probably won't be as much as you think it is about you. It'll be much more about them, and that's that perspective of being able to step away from, hey, this is me, and these are the things that make up who I am, and this is them, and these are the things that make up who they are. That becomes a very powerful moment, because not only can you talk about them and begin to language that and create a new context of motivation in directions that are going to be positive, but you can also begin to, let's just say, lessen those moments when we demotivate people. Importance of motivation and attitude. Well, these patterns or maps are part of our behavioral habits that impact thinking, decision-making, and behavior by helping us manage our experiences. Remember, that's the unconscious organizing principle that says, hey, we're at church. You don't stand up and start saying things to other people, or you don't talk in church, or you don't, if your kid cries, you take them outside. I remember that, when we're trying to take our kids to church, and grabbing them and get them outside before they disturb too many people. Those things we sort of learn. We grow up in that context, and we learn those mental models, and we behave that way based on these patterns of how we actually perceive things. Motivational and attitudinal patterns help us manage experiences by, this is key, filtering what goes on around us. In other words, there's a tendency for us to admit things or block things unconsciously. We won't even hear certain things, and other things we hear that other people thought weren't even said. Then, of course, there's one more element that I need to add to this, and it's transcription. What happens in a multivariate environment where all people are diverse and in different developmental levels is we get the need for transcription. In other words, you're seeing on the bottom of this slide a new subtitling system from PowerPoint that automatically installed itself, by the way. And I love it because I hear things, but I don't always hear what I think people said. And that's transcription. In other words, when you're transcribing something, you're listening to what they're saying and you're writing down exactly what they said. Not what you thought they said, not what you think they mean, which is where translation comes in, but the idea of understanding this transcribing effect. This is very important that we understand this, because once you understand that you will say something to someone and they will transcribe it differently, at a different level, at a different meaning, at a different language, it will mean different things, and you can watch how transcription actually affects their behavior. And then, of course, the translating part, it gets the admits into our sense of reality because we don't know about the blocks. We don't know. That's why it's really important to develop relationships with other people who can actually say, what do you think they said? What was our manager really saying? And they will have a different idea of what you heard. And that's where translation comes in. So we can use that very, very helpfully. Motivational and attitudinal patterns or maps are very powerful influences on personality, emotions, competencies, and the resulting behavior from all of these factors. In other words, what people are seeing is actually not what's happening, and we're trying to influence what people are seeing, but that's not actually happening. So in the end, our behavior is what determines our performance as they perceive our behavior. Very important to note that. As a result of connections and relationships, motivational and attitudinal patterns or maps turn out to be a major force in predicting performance levels in given context. So what that means is that we can say, well, look, this job requires these meta programs, a person moving in the direction and moving away from these things. And then we can test people and say, oh, this person lines up just like that. They should be able to perform the behavior necessary to be successful in this job. That's called job modeling, and it's really important and really desirable in a lot of cases. In spite of their importance, motivational and attitudinal patterns are relatively invisible to the person and off the radar of human resource and organizational development specialists in North America. It's just because, you know, we have so much out there, and we just can't experience or learn it all right away. And of course, this opportunity for us to introduce the IWAM, which is one of the reasons that I included it in self-knowledge, is because people really don't understand what's actually going on in the process of work attitudes and motivation at, let's just say, the unconscious level. And that's really important to understand that. And of course, that allows us to take the learning that we have about something that's happening unconsciously and then move that into a conscious realm through self-awareness, through other awareness, and then begin to look at that in a different way and not see things the way we saw them before, because alternate perspectives are available, and oftentimes that helps us a lot. Now look, I want you to show you this graph. This is what we were talking about. So there's your actions and word. This is an iceberg. And when you look at those, the visible behavior is about 10%. In other words, you can't really tell from someone's visible behavior what you're doing in a context until you understand all of the things that are happening below the water level. All these things here. So looking at something and making a judgment about it is what we do. Now, I mean, that's what we do as managers and leaders and as people making decisions every day. At the same time, there's a whole lot more to it. And I think that's what's really important. These invisible factors are 90%. And remember, most of these invisible factors are unconscious. So we're taking a very small piece of experience in the actions and words, and we're denoting that as a particular form of behavior, and it means X, Y, and Z without obviously considering all these other things. And that's why I think introducing non-action as an action becomes very important, because it gives us time, it gives us space between stimulus and response. That space between stimulus and response is so critical to allow our system to move out of its quote-unquote judgmental mode, which we need, and it's unconscious usually, into a mode that begins to look at that as a perspective, our perspective. And that means there could be additional perspectives. When you can take the space in between stimulus and response, and you can expand that and allow some of this other information to come in, realizing that what you've seen is a perspective that you have unconsciously grabbed onto and maybe judged quickly. And remember, that's important sometimes, but in a more complex environment, the links between cause and effect are delayed. They're often not seen. There's many levels. So we want to sort of take non-action at times to be able to allow, let's just say, our system to catch up to the complexity. Very important to understand that as we go forward. I think time and space are all those things that are going to be really important as we go forward. Now, the IWAM, as we mentioned, the Inventory for Work Attitude and Motivation does this. And that's the end of part one. I want to come back and get into a little bit more of the nitty-gritty, but I don't want to make this presentation too long, because what we said already is really going to help you if you watch the video a couple times, so you can kind of get the concepts around context and around these ideas of behavioral patterns and things like that. We'll talk more about those when we come back in IWAM Part 2. I want to thank you for watching.